Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Ralph Caviso with Henry Fogel again in week 4 of ARTM 450. What we're talking about today in this video is what is the culture of an organization and how does an organization behave? Believe it or not, organizations are like organisms. They're like people. They behave a certain way. They have a certain way of thinking, and they have a value system, just like each of us has. We may not think about it in terms of ourselves, but when we are leading an organization, we are the most important person in defining that culture and defining that behavior. So what we're going to talk about is what is it that defines an organization's culture? And what it really boils down to is organizations succeed because they manage effectively. Now, what does that mean? You have many different functions in an organization, and they can operate in a silo where each of them just does their job. They know what they're supposed to do. They know what their objectives are. They know what they're measured on. But if they never communicate with any other silo, they're not going to be successful, because no one function can exist or be effective and successful without understanding how it integrates with the others. So managing across organization or functions within an organization is absolutely essential. How does work get managed? Who assigns work? Is it clearly assigned? Do I know when I leave my boss's office what I'm supposed to do, when I'm supposed to have it done by, who I need to be consulting with, when it's due, and what's my budget? If that isn't clear, then a manager will likely interpret the assignment rather than execute it. So the leader must make these things very clear. How are decisions made within the organization? Is it one person? Is it top down, where one person rules, and regardless of what the others feel, they have to go along? Or it is a collaborative process where there's a dialogue going on constantly and an exchange of ideas back and forth. The organizations that are hierarchical, that is, you have a guy on the top, and then you have a guy or a gal on the top, and then you have all these functions, and they all work top down. Those are the hierarchies in organizations of the past. They don't work today, and if they work that way, they get themselves in trouble. Henry, you want to comment a little bit about this concept of how you manage people and manage work in a performing arts organization?
I think it's so important to create a climate where people aren't reluctant to state an opinion that they know might be different from the person they're talking to. The nicest thing that was said about me when I retired after 18 years at the Chicago Symphony as its president, there was a nice party that the board threw and the staff was there. One of the board members stood up with a glass and said, I propose a toast to Henry because he did something I rarely have seen CEOs do. He created a culture where I saw his staff disagree with him at board meetings in front of the board, and clearly felt comfortable doing that. And you know, I retired in 2003, so 17 years ago. That's the one thing I remember from that farewell party, because I thought at the time, he got it. He got the culture that I tried hard to create. And I have seen organizations, and I have done consulting in organizations, as I know you have, Ralph, where you just know, if you have a talk with the staff person, they might say to you, well, you know, I knew this wasn't going to work, but I just couldn't say that to my boss. That is a terrible, terrible thing. And to me, the culture of an organization starts at the top. If the CEO doesn't establish the right culture, nobody under the CEO will.
Let me add 2 other aspects, and this goes to behavior. We have to be very sensitive to 2 other very important behavioral issues. One is the commitment to diversity. whether this is in the hiring, whether this is in the selection of programming, whether this is in establishing relationship with community, a respect for diversity and what diversity adds to an organization is valued. And if that is missing, then the things we talked about in week one, where you need to have a very strong connection to the community, that will be jeopardized. And it makes a statement about who the organization is if it doesn't value and respect every individual. The second area of behavior is ethics. How do you behave? Are you honest in performing your work? And the leader, as Henry just said, sets the tone for this. If the leader is transparent, open, acknowledges when they make a mistake, seeks information before decisions are made, and then acts upon them, that openness discourages any kind of deviation from a set of rules that keep everyone in tow in terms of honesty and integrity. And it's not just, do you have your hand in the till and you're taking money you shouldn't be taking? It's also, this is where diversity and business ethics really come together. It's, are you valuing people? Are you respecting people?
When Ralph talked about diversity, by the way, I would just expand a little bit. Yes, of course, he meant racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And maybe he meant age diversity.
Absolutely.
But I'm also going to say stylistic diversity, people who manage and communicate in different ways. It's really important to do that. For just, if you were the CEO of an important, fairly major performing arts organization, and everybody in your marketing department was over 50 years old, you are, I guarantee you, not using social media in an appropriate way. There are generational differences that you have to also have represented on your staff.
Let's talk a little bit about what this week is in terms of assignments and what they're geared to do. There are two articles that we've asked you to read. One is called The Success Syndrome. And it's an interesting article that describes how a successful organization can actually be its own worst enemy, because people get used to success and don't see problems as they emerge. The second article is an article we'll be using both in 450 and 455, and it's called A Fight at the Opera. And it's about the Metropolitan Opera, and it was negotiations that took place the one before the last, when the Metropolitan Opera was in a crisis of finances and leadership. In reading those, keep that in mind, because the assignments we have for you, one is to choose a company that has failed and choose a company that has succeeded. Not just tell us why that they succeeded or failed, but give us reasons why they succeeded. Give us reasons why they failed. Keeping in mind what we've said at this video, keeping in mind those two articles, bring into your discussion, and it's an individual assignment, what it is that characterize that. And then when we do the Zoom session at the end of the week, we'll kind of bring this together. And one of the examples that you'll be, one of the exercises in the discussion board that you'll have is a case that both Henry and I worked on. And I'm going to ask Henry to speak a little bit about it to give you background before you engage in that discussion group assignment.
Yes, and I'm going to try to do this fairly briefly, but the case involves the Louisville Orchestra, which was an important orchestra in America for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into now, but they recorded and performed a lot of American music and became famous for that. They also had a board of directors that did not consist of the important business and community leaders in Louisville. It was kind of second tier. And that board was completely risk averse in a whole bunch of different ways. And ultimately, they tried to cut the size of the orchestra and the payroll of the orchestra to the extent that the musicians were not willing to accept. And so the musicians went on strike. And over the course of virtually a full season that they were out, they missed an entire season. Both Ralph and I got involved in the Louisville Orchestra. I got involved because the musicians knew me from a previous dispute that they had had. And they actually, I was hired, this is the only time, by the way, this has ever happened to me and maybe any other manager. I was hired by the musicians to advise them on how to behave and how not to behave during the strike, what not to say. And ultimately, a long series of events that I won't take my time or your time with now led to the need to bring a mediator in, and I recommended Ralph. And then you went in, Ralph, and?
To make it as concise as I can, I was able to crystallize where the musicians were and how far they were willing to go, and where the board was and how far they were willing to go. And my job as a mediator was to find something that would bring the parties together. Ultimately, the proposal that I made as a mediator became the labor agreement that the parties agreed to later. The exercise you're going into gives you a fact pattern, and it's very orchestra specific. And it asks you to develop the arguments that you would make to the mediator in support of your position. So that's what we're going to do in the Zoom session.
Right. And I want to underline, Ralph did say, and he's right, that it's a specific orchestra exercise. But the thinking is applicable anywhere. And that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. What's happened here was it's really about a dispute that needed to get resolved. And how did the parties approach a resolution? That's universal. So while you may think this is orchestra-centric, it is a lesson in life that helps to understand how to create a functional organization for one that's totally dysfunctional.
And with that, we will say thank you, and we will see you in the next Zoom session.
Thank you, Henry.